When the Roman Empire officially split in 395 AD, following the death of Theodosius the Great, the division merely formalized differences that had long been taking shape. The Western Roman Empire was largely rural and less urbanized, especially outside Italy, with Latin as the dominant language. The Eastern Empire, by contrast, was home to thriving metropolitan centers, a predominantly Greek-speaking population, and a more advanced, resilient economy. Yet, a closer look reveals that the two halves in 395 may have been more similar than often assumed. Both were vast, multi-ethnic states with Latin as the official language, and both were undergoing the Christianization of their populations. They were governed by Latinized elites. Theodosius himself was a Roman citizen from Iberia with little knowledge of Greek. And in both East and West, real military power frequently rested with semi-Romanized Germanic chieftains. This early portrait of Eastern Rome in the late 4th and early 5th centuries differs significantly from the image often associated with the later Byzantine Empire. A deeply spiritual state with a professional, disciplined military loyal to the emperor, comprising both mercenaries and native forces, and Greek as the official language of administration, law, literature, and science. But how did this transformation take place? Was there a single turning point in the evolution of the Eastern Roman Empire into the Greek-speaking medieval state we now recognize? Many events could signify those turning points. Justinian's decision to codify Roman law in Greek, the loss of the empire's eastern provinces under Heraclius, or the increasing influence of Greek culture during the Isaurian dynasty. While all these played a role, one figure stands out more than any other, a pivotal, yet often overlooked emperor under the reign of whom this transition first started, Leo I. But in order to assess Leo's pivotal role in the transition of the Eastern Roman state, we first have to go back to the reign of Emperor Theodosius the Great. Before the year 378 AD, Theodosius would have been an unlikely candidate for the throne, being the son of a military commander who had lost his favor with the emperor, resulting in his execution. However, 378 would be marked as the year of one of the most devastating defeats in Roman history, the Battle of Adrianople. The emperor at the time, and much of the aristocracy, would lay slain after the Gothic victory. The Eastern Roman Empire was headless, and thus the Senate chose Theodosius, a man with a proven military record, to deal with the chaos. The invading Goths were numerous, and the Eastern Roman military was almost non-existent after the battle. Theodosius initially tried to contain the Goths militarily by recruiting men to his army, many of whom were also Goths, and then organizing small-scale operations against them. Even though his tactics proved somewhat effective, Theodosius had to eventually reconcile and allow for the Goths to settle within Roman lands in the northern Balkan provinces. However, this would not be a simple settlement, as the Goths would retain their internal organization and hierarchies, basically consisting of several semi-independent kingdoms within the empire. Having now the Goths on his side, Theodosius managed to unite the Roman Empire for a final time in 394, but died just 1 year later, leaving the East to be governed by his incapable son, Arcadius. Arcadius ruled until 408 AD, leaving the government to his 7-year-old son Theodosius II and his sister Pulcheria. The reign of Theodosius II was the longest of the Theodosian dynasty, lasting until 451, when he died, and afterwards Pulcheria married Marcian, a distinguished soldier with roots in the Balkans who lived until 457, ending the line of the successors of Theodosius. To understand the transformation of the Eastern Roman Empire under Leo, we first have to examine the 3 key elements influencing the Roman state during the Theodosian dynasty: the Gothic influence, the relation between church and emperor, and the extent of the Latin language. It was during those years that many barbarians, especially Goths, being professional soldiers, quickly rose up the ranks of the imperial army, even attaining the status of Magister Militum. The case of the Goth commander Gainus is particularly interesting, as he ended up revolting and causing great trouble to the empire in 400 AD by occupying the capital itself. Additionally, several more nations had joined the Goths in their migrations. Among them were the Alans. Similarly to the Gothic chieftains before, it was an Alan warlord, Aspar, who rose up the ranks of the Roman army to become Magister Militum, as was the case with his father. Aspar, born in the early 400s, handled the heavy lifting of the imperial campaigns during the 400s and 20s up to the 400s and 50s, earning great reputation as a general. As years passed by and the imperial court was isolated from the military affairs, Aspar managed to gain immense power within the state, as he controlled the most powerful institution, the army. It was thus him who in 451, after the death of Theodosius II, chose Marcian as the next emperor. And it would be Aspar again that would choose the successor of Marcian as the new emperor, a man who he thought that he could easily use as his puppet to achieve his own ambitions, Leo. Regarding the church matters, much of the interaction between state and church can be seen through the lens of heresies and how the state dealt with them. The oldest of those heresies, Arianism, had been condemned by Theodosius, but the settlement of Arian Goths and other barbarians reignited disputes. State laws eventually criminalized Arianism for civilians, but not for military troops, reflecting the Goths' importance in the army. Under the Theodosians, two new opposing heresies emerged. Nestorianism in 428, which claimed Christ had two separate persons, human and divine, and monophysitism, which asserted he had only one nature. Nestorianism was condemned at the Council of Ephesus in 431, affirming Christ's two natures in one person. Monophysitism was condemned by Emperor Marcian at the Council of Chalcedon in 451. The council did not eradicate the heresy, but it would instead lead to a more significant event. Constantinople was elevated to patriarchal status, equal to Rome and above Alexandria, Antioch and Jerusalem. It can thus be seen that the emperors acted as guardians of orthodoxy, but the church retained considerable independence. Bishops were often appointed without imperial input, and leading clerics sometimes challenged emperors, such as Ambrose of Milan rebuking Theodosius after the Thessalonica massacre, or John Chrysostom criticizing Emperor Arcadius and his wife for lavish spending. In sum, Theodosian emperors, like Constantine before them, oversaw church affairs but did not directly control it, while the church maintained and asserted its own authority. On the linguistic side, from 378 to 457 AD, Latin remained the official language of both administration and the military. In government, this is evident from the laws issued by Theodosius and his successors, all composed in Latin, despite most later emperors being native Greek speakers. In the military, Latin persisted in the titles of offices, and inscriptions on soldiers' tombs across the Balkans further attest to its use, making it very probable that commands in the army were also issued in Latin. The Goths and the other foederati that formed a substantial part of the imperial forces are likely to have favored Latin over Greek, having long been accustomed to it through years of service as mercenaries. Summing up the previous points, in 457 AD, the Eastern Roman Empire was a state controlled politically by the Alan chieftain Aspar, with a firm hand on the military that comprised of multiple foederati, with the emperors serving mostly as figureheads. On the church matters, the emperors joined the church in their attempt to combat heresies, but they could in no case assert full control over it. Lastly, Latin would be the main language of the army and the administration, even if its usage would have been limited by most of the civilians. Leo the Thracian likely began his military career as a soldier in Thrace, never imagining the heights it would eventually reach. A native of Dacia Aureliana, modern-day Bulgaria, he was probably a Latinized inhabitant of the region. By the age of 56, Leo held the post of Comes Rei Militaris, a mid-ranking military officer stationed in Salimbria, near the imperial capital. When Emperor Marcian died suddenly, there was no clear Theodosian successor to claim the throne. For reasons still uncertain, Aspar, the powerful Magister Militum, did not seek the crown for himself. His Alan heritage or Aryan faith may have barred the way. Instead, he put forward a seemingly loyal subordinate Leo, presenting him to the Senate. On 7th February 457 AD, just 10 days after Marcian's death, Leo was inaugurated emperor. Yet this was no moment of personal triumph for Leo. He understood all too well that his elevation depended entirely on Aspar's will, and that the same man could remove him just as easily. Determined to free himself from his patron's grip, Leo began moving strategically to undermine the Alans' influence. Leo's first move was to request that Patriarch Anastasius, whose office had been created only 6 years earlier, crown him emperor. At first glance, the choice might seem unremarkable, but it carried far deeper significance. Traditionally, imperial coronations had been performed by the army, the Senate, or court officials, institutions that, at the time, were largely under Aspar's control. By securing his coronation from the Patriarch, Leo sidestepped all the powers held by the Magister Militum. The precedent he set would prove far more enduring than the immediate political maneuver. From that moment onward, the Eastern Roman Emperor would not only be the leader of the Romans, but also the representative of God on earth. With this act, Leo shifted the source of imperial legitimacy from military might to the sanction of the Church, a tradition that, in various forms, endures to this day and can be traced back to this decisive moment. Next on Leo's list of priorities was to remove the most influential force within the army, the Goths and the Alans. To counter them, he needed hardy, battle-tested warriors who could match the ferocity of the foederati. His answer came in the form of the Isaurians, a rugged people from the remote mountains of central Anatolia. Although they had been Roman subjects for nearly 4 centuries, the Isaurians had never been fully subdued by the imperial authorities. They were the last remnant of the ancient Anatolian peoples, kin to the Lycians, Lydians, and Luvians, perhaps even tracing their lineage back to the Hittites. Their legacy survived only in their names, for they had no written language to preserve their history. Whatever Leo's personal connection to them may have been, the Isaurians suited his needs perfectly. Unlike the Aryan Goths and Alans, they had embraced Chalcedonian Christianity. From 458 onward, Leo began recruiting them in large numbers, bringing contingents of Isaurian fighters to the capital. One of their clan leaders, Tarasicodissa, worked closely with him to facilitate this influx. Tarasicodissa would become more than just an ally. Leo married his daughter Ariadne to him, and the Isaurian leader adopted a new, Hellenized name, Zenon. Once the new emperor revealed his true intentions to Aspar, he was no longer safe, even within his own palace. To secure his position, Leo created a new palace guard, a unit destined to become a major force in Eastern Roman politics and warfare, the Excubitores. Composed mainly of Isaurians, the Excubitores were charged with protecting the emperor, a duty that aligned with their own interests, since their fortunes depended on his survival. Command of this elite corps fell to none other than Zenon. The unit numbered around 300 heavily armored infantrymen, trained specifically for urban combat. Under Leo, the Excubitores excelled in their role, and their influence only grew over time. From their ranks emerged future emperors, including Zenon himself, Justin, and even Justinian. Though the corps eventually disappeared from the palace, it later re-emerged as a battlefield unit, with records mentioning it as late as the late 11th century. Leo was likely a native Latin speaker, yet he was certainly fluent in Greek. While he did not consciously promote Greek through deliberate policy, the language's influence grew markedly during his reign as a result of his actions. First, the Church, whose liturgy and administration in the East were conducted in Greek, gained considerable influence in state affairs under Leo. Second, the Isaurians, though still speaking their own native tongue, were far more likely to be fluent in Greek than in Latin, owing to their close contact with the Greek-speaking populations of Asia Minor. Leo appeared to have positioned himself perfectly to assume full control of the state, steadily sidelining Aspar and his allies. The Alan chieftain's influence gradually ebbed, and any assassination attempt he might have contemplated came too late. By then, the Excubitores would have been ready to thwart it. The emperor's first decisive strike came in 466, when, with Zenon's help, he accused Aspar's son Ardabur of conspiring with the Sassanids against imperial authority. Ardabur was promptly stripped of his offices. Yet in the late 460s, Leo's advantage nearly slipped away. In 467, he intervened in the Western Empire, appointing the Greek noble Anthemius as Western Emperor, with the goal of breaking the power of the barbarian magister Militum Regima, much as Leo had done with Aspar in the east. This move may also have been designed to remove Anthemius, a strong contender for the Eastern throne. Still, Leo backed him fully, launching one of the largest military expeditions in Roman history, a naval campaign to retake Carthage and dismantle the Vandal kingdom, long a menace to both empires. The venture ended in disaster, draining imperial resources and weakening Leo's position. Sensing opportunity, Aspar regained influence. In 470, he persuaded Leo to agree to a marriage between his second son, Patricius, and Leo's daughter Leontia, giving Patricius a direct claim to the throne. Leo, then vulnerable, accepted, only for the people of Constantinople to revolt, demanding that Patricius first convert from Arianism to Orthodoxy. The shifting balance of power left Leo no choice but to act decisively. In 471, under the pretext of investigating a conspiracy, likely fabricated, Leo summoned Aspar and his sons, Ardabur and Patricius, to a private audience. There, all three were killed, ending Aspar's line. With that, Leo finally secured undisputed authority. But his triumph was short-lived. He died in 474, just 3 years later, leaving the throne to his son-in-law Zenon. In sum, Leo's struggle to free himself from his puppet master unintentionally reshaped the Eastern Roman Empire for centuries. He broke the overwhelming influence of the foederati, secured the Church's role in legitimizing imperial authority and participating in governance, and laid the groundwork for the eventual dominance of Greek as the empire's official language. He also integrated the Isaurians into the imperial framework and founded the Excubitores, a core that would shape Eastern Roman politics for generations. Despite his misfortunes in foreign policy, Leo's internal reforms stand out as some of the most transformative in imperial history, arguably surpassing any ruler before or after him.